All right, I'd like to go ahead and convene the Land Use Committee meeting of July 19th. It is 4:30. I'm Scott Diener, Chair and City Council Member.
Jay Rose Pepe, City Council Member.
Got Fred, are you able to?
Oh, did you want us to introduce? I'm Fred Chang, Council Member.
Yeah, and staff quickly if you'd like as well.
Nick Bond, the Community Development Director for the city.
Jim Fisk, Senior Planner.
Josie Rademacher, Assistant Planner.
And Brandy Wallace is also here in the chambers. Ian
Okay.
Smith. Ian indicated he'd be about 5 minutes late, so.
Okay. Does that mean we want to switch the order? Well, first of all, is there any additions to the agenda?
No, is anyone else present in the audience?
Yeah, we have a full house here. There's probably 10, 12 people.
Oh, okay.
Since
Right.
Ian is running late, I would suggest taking Brandy's item first, which is the street vacation. And that's about a 5-minute discussion, I think.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead with the right-of-way vacation, item number 3 first.
And I can, I don't know if Brandy if it has a microphone or not.
I do. I was just going to remind the committee that this went before them last year in May. This is part of their courthouse campus remodel project. They submitted the application. There was a communication of waiting for payment. And so we finally got that a couple weeks ago, and they are ready to move forward. The proposal that's submitted from last year to what's in the packet today and before you has not been changed.
Okay.
So the goal of the meeting tonight is to make sure that this committee is still on, these members of the committee are still on board with moving forward to bring it to the council for them to set a public hearing. They're not going to take any action. They're just going to declare a public hearing date to hear testimony from the public as to whether they should move forward with this street vacation or not.
And I wanted to remind everyone, I've been meeting with the architects for the courthouse project. Their first phase, which is to build a portion of their surface parking lot, is dependent on these street vacations. And so their goal is to build the parking lot. And then after that parking lot is in place, they can begin construction on phase 1 of the new building, which is going to displace parking from another area of the county campus. And so staff is fully supportive of the street vacations. We just felt it had been long enough since you had seen this. We wanted to remind everyone of the vacation, so it's not a surprise when it comes back to council in hopefully a week or 3.
Okay, so
Visual. Is it Exhibit A?
several exhibits at the end of your packet. So this agenda item has a proposition part 1, which is a realignment of the access into the jail with Ada Street. That's not part of this, is it?
It is. So proposition part 1 and proposition part 2 are both vacations they're
Okay.
seeking this time.
All right. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mention that on the petition to vacate city right away. Is that because it's a second application?
Nick, can you walk through it really quickly? Because it looks to me like they're trying to vacate a portion of the Austin street, not just the alley, but the street. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if Josie, can you enable screen sharing?
And that's in proposition part 2 or Exhibit A, I guess.
Yeah, both. I think proposition part 1 and proposition part 2 are more of an overview, whereas the exhibits are legal areas that correspond to a legal description as prepared by the surveyor.
Screen
So
sharing's been updated.
All right, thank you. So the first of the series of maps, you're right, it shows Austin as well as this alley on the northern half of this block between Taylor and Smith Street. And so when you scroll down to the very last page, you'll see this parking lot layout. And so basically, in order to build the surface parking lot in the north half of this block, they have to vacate both of those areas. I believe their goal long-term is to have this entire block be parking for the county campus, but they have not finished acquiring the properties on the south half of the block.
Okay.
So
Did
then the
they-
second, go ahead.
I was under the impression that they weren't going to be acquiring any more property. But that's pretty old information, a couple years at least.
That's not what I've heard and what they've shown in their most recent phasing plan. So
Okay.
we met with them, we met with the architect probably 6 weeks ago and went through this once again, and they're still showing the same phasing as before, but it's only that the phase 0 is to build the north half of that block to provide some parking to offset the displacement related to building the new courthouse.
Okay. I
And
think
for what
maybe
it's
what I,
worth-
oh, go ahead.
I did confirm with Eric Baker yesterday that the original plan submitted had not changed. So he said it was good to go as is, if that's helpful. That was as of yesterday.
Okay.
So the second map here, this is exhibit B1. This is the block that contains the jail. And this is where the Sweeney Street vacation is being made so that the new driveway can be aligned with Ada. And then this old alley is being vacated that runs north-south through these historic block layouts. And so that again is shown on the part 1 map here. You can see it in blue over the aerial photo. So everything in blue gets vacated under part 1. And then under part 2, everything in green gets vacated. And the county controls all of the adjacent properties that are acquiring that vacated right of way.
Then my observation earlier was that Sweeney Street and that north-south alleyway isn't reflected on their petition on the first page. It only references Austin and, well, that one only references Austin. So not a big deal, but we just need to make sure that the application is accurate.
I think our application, the formatting doesn't
I
allow
think they
you
ran
to-
out of room.
Yeah, I think they ran out of room.
Ah, okay.
That's still no excuse for an incomplete application, running out of room.
Well, we'll just have to
Well,
fix that
and
before it
so
goes.
are,
to-
all we doing here today is just approving this to go to full council. We're not necessarily making a recommendation on this, or are we doing that as well?
You have to, so the city council has to vote to set a public hearing date if they want to advance this. And so the first step, I believe, Brandy, is that we take this for a vote so that you can set a public hearing date within the date parameters in state law. And then,
Correct.
after the public hearing is when you would actually be voting. So the land use committee is not obligated to make a recommendation one way or another.
Okay, well, I'm comfortable moving this forward.
Concur.
Yeah, I guess we might as well have it go to a hearing. I don't actually like Proposition 2, but that can come up later. I don't like their taking Austin Street. But that has nothing to do with having this go to a full council hearing.
Well, one of the nice things about taking Austin Street right now is they have to go into, what's the street right below that?
Smith?
Is it Smith? That runs east-west?
I think that's Smith.
So if you want to use the current parking lot, you come in on Smith. One way is to come in on Smith and then go up Austin into that parking lot. So in one thought, this will reduce the traffic going through that neighborhood component. But ultimately, the county wants to own the whole block, so I'm not sure it really matters.
Yeah, I'm looking at the parcel search right now. And they've almost got everything completely wrapped up.
Well, there's two parcels they don't. One is the apartment building at the corner of Austin and Smith, which they have made. That's going to be expensive for them to pick up unless they, yeah. And then
Yeah.
there's a residence in the middle of the,
Right. And
Right.
originally,
So
we were-
the
but that has-
vacation,
that-
oh, go
that's
ahead.
Bearing on what, that has no bearing on what we're doing today. That's just anecdotal.
Yeah. And I think providing the vacation, even if they don't, if the county cannot acquire the multiple unit structure there, it helps with the traffic that they would be, that structure would be seeing, right? Because you no longer will be able to access the parking lot from the south. You'll have to do it from the north. And that is the upsell for me on the vacation.
that's a good point, Scott, but what if the residents of that apartment want to have access from Taylor Street? And that will be blocked by the county acquiring that portion of Austin.
I was going to point out there's an additional unvacated alley between Austin and Klein. And and if the county acquires the rest of the block, my understanding is it's their intent to come back to vacate this alley as well as the rest of Austin, as well as the rest of the alley that is on the eastern of the two blocks. But the Austin is not a dead end as it stands. It connects through to the alley.
Okay. Well, we can have more discussion with the full council. And we've got concurrence to move it forward. Okay. Anything further on that agenda item? All right. Do we want to jump back to one, or are we?
Mr. Smith has not yet arrived.
All right. Do you want to go into the multifamily tax exemption, Nick?
Yeah, so in your packet, we've been talking about our multifamily tax exemption program for a couple of months, maybe even more than a year at this point. We recently completed the preparation of the housing action plan, and in that housing action plan were recommendations for how the multifamily tax exemption program could potentially be amended. And so I wanted to revisit this discussion with the land use committee to get some direction as we start drafting changes to the multifamily tax exemption ordinance. The housing action plan recommendations include a number of different points, and there's a few that I would like to touch on. And there's one piece of information that I wanted to share with you before I go into the housing action plan, and that is that we recently got some information, and I'm going to share my screen here. This is not in your packet, but we had an appraisal submitted for a related for an apartment project in the city that is dedicating right-of-way, and we had to establish a value for right-of-way. And there was some interesting data about rents in Kitsap County, and it sort of made me want to take a step or two back on MFTE, because what we're seeing is that for the first time, the last 2 quarters, we're starting to see a decline in rent. And it seems that microeconomic, supply and demand is starting to kick in to the point that rents are actually starting to go down in this is both Bremerton and the Port Orchard area. We have data going back to 2014 showing how much rents have gone up in that time. And we're just seeing, it seems like things maybe peaked in 2022 Q1 or Q2 and have now started coming back down. And with the amount of construction that we have in the city, it seems like that trend is probably likely to continue based on where we're at in this economic cycle. And so as we're considering the recommendations from the housing action plan, I wanted the city council to be fully aware that it seems that all of the building of apartments that we've seen in the city over the last 3 or so years is starting to have an impact on rents actually going in an opposite direction. And it's made me question some of the previous discussions we've had about MFTE and whether we want to push harder on 12-year MFTE or whether increasing supply is going to have a broader effect on rent in Port Orchard that may be a more positive outcome. And so I wanted to throw that out for discussion. The housing action plan recommendations, the first recommendation was that we clarify our maps. One of the challenges that we have right now is these maps appear in code, and you can click on the maps and have them enlarged, but there's no instruction in code that actually tells people to do that. So it's hard for people to potentially read the maps. And so that's something that we should be doing as part of this. I don't think that's, really a question whether we should or shouldn't do it. But there's some other changes, including a new 20-year multifamily tax exemption program, which contains, again, is really driving affordable housing requirements. And this is something that the city could potentially consider adopting, though the amount of work that goes into tracking and reporting on these multifamily housing tax exemptions is considerable. And I have to say that just given our limited resources, I'm not a fan of the affordable housing exemption, solely because of the amount of tracking, of verifying that landlords are renting units below market as they should be, and then filling out annual reports that we have to submit to the state on each of these apartment complexes that comes into the city. So that's one change that came out of state law recently, and that the housing action plan addresses. The housing action plan also suggested establishing minimum densities for multifamily tax exemptions rather than using simply our parking. We offer a multifamily tax exemption basically for mixed use buildings where parking is beneath a building, as opposed to being surface parking in a garden apartment setting. And they said, essentially, if you get to 40 or 50 units per acre, you're going to have that type of parking anyway. And so let's focus on the minimum density of a project rather than just how parking is configured and what percentage of spaces are under a building or on a surface parking lot. They also suggested that we consider changes to how we calculate affordability. We focus on basically the HUD fair market rent for our area and ensuring that these units are rented for below fair market rent. And that is instead of asking that these units be targeted to people at very specific income levels. And you do have to still be below a certain income level to qualify. But other cities say that you can simply charge, a percentage of someone's income is the maximum rent that you can charge, as opposed to just setting a fixed rate for rent, which is the approach that we have taken. And it followed a previous approach taken by the city of Seattle.
Now, Nick, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
You were looking for the land use committee's, I guess, discussion. I'll just call it discussion of these miscellaneous points. Do you want to talk about them as you go through them, or?
Sure. Yeah, that would be totally fine.
Okay, so I don't think anybody will have an issue with making the maps better. And then with respect to the 20-year program and establishing a minimum density, I think that makes sense. But then at the same time, you were saying you're not really a fan of the program kind of at large, as the tracking for that can be quite burdensome. So that seems like a pretty big thing to overcome. What are your thoughts on how we do that?
Well, I guess the reason I shared the data from this appraisal was that I think that simply building units in Port Orchard is having a positive impact on the rent that people are paying. And it's not rent that certain people are paying, it's rent that all people are paying in the city. And so I guess my first question is, should we be taking a step back and looking at more of a supply economics, perspective on housing, and is the answer to trying to lower rents in Port Orchard that we need to continue providing housing at the rates that we've been building, because it is starting to drive the price of housing down? And is that a better tool than asking developers to put 20% of units and to rent those below fair market rents, which requires a whole lot of work for the city? And I'm willing to continue doing the 20% units affordable for a 12-year tax exemption, which is the program that we have now. But I did want the committee to be aware that it's a considerable amount of effort that we have to put into administering that. And another recommendation out of the housing action plan was actually that we needed a housing program coordinator for the city that would be able to do this sort of thing. And that's something that we currently haven't budgeted. And so it falls to our existing staff.
Okay,
I see
Scott,
Jay's hand was up.
yeah, just a couple of comments. One, and I can't quantify this. I think at some point in time, and feel free to weigh in, Nick, we were not getting the bang for the buck on what we were saving on the on taxes. In other words, number of units and the price of the units, I believe, was not really impacting or close to what we would consider affordable housing. And I think you're right that it's a supply and demand issue. And the other thing, I know we had this discussion of a work study that and I'll use the word onerous, trying to keep track of this and have people report it. It's almost like, we don't know what's going on out there. And, from a personal perspective, until we had more positive news, quite frankly, I don't see the bang for the buck to the city on this.
Well, and I wanted to remind you that I think the conversation that we were having was that the amount of rent reduction that people are receiving relative to the amount of savings that developers are realizing were pretty disproportionate. The developers were saving a whole lot of money and the rent relief was pretty small. It isn't impacting the revenue that's coming to the city because of the way that Washington calculates property taxes. And so it's not like the city is losing a significant amount of revenue. It's really, are we getting enough rent reduction for how much of a tax break developers are getting to provide housing?
I would only add to what Jay said that I agree that I don't see how the city or lower income residents were getting any benefits as opposed to what the developers are getting, especially Pottery Creek next to Fred Meyer. They got the 8-year exemption on their property taxes, and they have incredibly high, well, good for them, rates for their units. Something else that we didn't have to address, and I don't know if we need to now with the new commerce rules, is the tax shift of the property tax that we're not getting. Is that actually shifted on to other property owners in the city? Bainbridge Island has actually just stated that that's how they're doing their MFTE. They're shifting that liability, I guess, tax onto the other residents or property owners, and that's not something we've addressed, and maybe we don't need to, Nick.
But yeah, I'm surprised to hear that Bainbridge has done that, because ultimately that's the assessor's role. And so as we add value to the city in terms of assessed valuation, remember that we're capped at 1% growth per year, and the assessor is calculating the added value of new apartments into the total pie. And then that pie is spread out among every resident of the city, but it exempts the owners of the apartment. So it is getting spread, in very, very small pieces, probably pennies per homeowner annually, or per property owner annually in the city, because even though our valuation is going up at more than 1%, our property tax can only grow by 1% annually. So it's a pretty, I think the way that we do it in Washington is complicated by our very unique tax structure, and but we have confirmed that the city is not actually losing money by offering these tax incentives. It has to do with this 1% increase in property tax for the levy lid that occurs, and then that 1% is spread across everyone, even though our total valuation in the city is more than 1% annually.
So in other words, it is spread amongst everyone except the developers who are getting the exemption.
Yeah, for the first 8 or 12 years, and then it gets spread across their projects as well.
And I think that might be a topic for the full council to discuss, the equity of that. Should the developer get that benefit when they're providing, whatever it is that we're expecting from them or not?
Right. I agree. That's it's a complex topic, and I was mostly focused here on trying to put together the pieces of a amendment to the code that could be brought forward for discussion. And so I think that needs to be that discussion needs to be more of a, should we continue with this program at all discussion, which is separate from, if we're going to continue with it, what does the code look like?
Nick, can we pass along the cost of tracking to the developers?
It's possible, but it's not easy to do. It's probably as much work as more work than it's worth.
Yeah,
Okay.
at this point in time, at least for my recommendation, first of all, I agree this is a full council discussion, but I'd like to see it as saying, should we end the exemption more so than modification of the exemption?
And it is entirely discretionary, as I recall.
It is, and where we were at previously was, we talked about the need for the project to fund projects that had structured parking. So if a project achieves
Right.
50 units per acre, that was the direction that we had. Was, yes, the council was supportive of continuing with it in that circumstance in
Mhm.
targeted areas of the city, but having it more broadly maybe is not something that we want to do. And if it is going to be more broad, we need to get more bang for our buck in terms of the affordable housing component.
Okay. Well, then, Nick, because I think you want to talk about all the recommendations from the Housing Action Plan. The next item that we talked about was considering how housing affordability is determined. Fred, Jay, did you guys have anything any comments on that?
None.
I think it makes sense to modify how we're doing that,
Yeah, I like
make it less complex.
I liked what the Housing Action Plan suggested.
That
Okay.
was focusing on income rather than just fair market rents.
Yeah.
In terms
Is
of the
that-
affordable units. So right now, what we do is we pull HUD data for our area, which says that the fair market rent for a 2-person household is, $1,600 a month. And then we require that unit be rented at 10% below fair market rent to somebody earning, 60% of adjusted median income for our area. And that's how we determine things. What they're saying is that you have to find the person, and based on their income, they can spend no more than 30% of their income on rent. And so it's a different approach to calculating rent. And the reason that I like our existing approach is that we're relying on data and not having to verify somebody's income as part of our process. We're simply saying, this is fair market rent, we're 10% below, and in order to qualify, the person has to have a tax return that says they earned this, and we can get an affidavit from the landlord stating that they have verified the person's income and that they qualify for the unit, and we don't have to actually get into how much money does a household earn.
Right, okay.
I can,
All right, so I think the approach there is more of a full council discussion. Are you going through all of these, Nick? The transit proximity, for example?
Yeah, that was the next one on the list. And when we drew our maps, we did either a quarter or a half-mile proximity to transit. And we felt that if a project wasn't in proximity to a transit stop, it shouldn't be on the targeted map. And what our consultants have pointed out is, they said 90% of your city is within the proximity that you've chosen. And so you're just adding layers of rules that maybe aren't necessary, because it's it's only reducing the area of the city that's eligible by like 10%. So I
Okay.
think their point was, do you actually need this criteria? And I tend to agree with them. We probably don't need that criteria, but when we started this program, we were trying to figure out, where it should apply.
Okay. I don't have any concerns about that.
So in terms of if we were to continue with an 8-year program, does using a 40 to 50 unit per acre density sound like a good way to go, as opposed to our current standard, which requires that 50% of a project's parking has to be within a structure? I think the 40 to 50, if we just picked a minimum density, that is probably an easier to administer program and easier to, if designers are starting to make design decisions based on where they put their parking rather than, designing a good project, that's probably not a great outcome. And so their recommendation was to let's just say if you hit 40 or if you hit 50 units per acre on a project, that would qualify you for that 8-year exemption.
Okay. Brad or Jay, did you guys have any comments on that?
No, I'm still thinking about that. Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, same here.
Nick, I think that does suggest that some of the units might be smaller, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think some of the units being, let's say, 1,600 square feet are too large. So if it would encourage smaller units, I would support that. And that sounds like it's a possibility under 40 to 50 units per acre.
Maybe. I don't know that units per acre is necessarily going to drive unit size. I suppose it could, but it's hard to say whether that would actually result from pursuing this recommendation.
Okay. Did you intend to skip over the height bonus?
Nope, I did not. The height bonus, right now we offer height bonuses under the transfer of development rights program that the county set up, where we're trying to preserve rural areas from development and push that development into the city. They're really, we've had that for 5 years, and nobody has taken advantage of it. I think the county has maybe only done one of these ever, or maybe they only have one interested party at this time. So the recommendation from the consultant was, hey, if somebody builds, these affordable housing projects, would you consider giving them a height bonus? And I guess my feeling on it is somewhat mixed. We obviously have height restrictions in downtown and the view protection overlay district above downtown. I certainly wouldn't want to provide height bonuses in those areas, because we've studied height so much there to try to balance preserving views with ensuring that some development happens downtown. In other areas of the city, I'm not really seeing that 4- and 5-story development is economically viable at this time in Port Orchard. So I don't know that it's going to result in any projects, but it's certainly something that you could consider pursuing. But I would probably put that on my list of things to exclude from a proposed amended ordinance.
So I don't think that the county's TDR program is ripe. I think you mentioned, Nick, that it had been used. It's been used for a project called Stone Ridge. And the parcels that they allowed to be eligible as TDR certs were legacy parcels that weren't developable anyways. And so we've pointed those out as kind of double dipping, if you will. And I don't think that it's ready to transfer or be engaged with the cities quite yet.
Yeah. So would the committee support looking at height bonuses in conjunction with MFTE, or is this something that you'd rather put off until the future?
I think they should be dropped for now.
That was my feeling as well. And that's probably why I skipped over it as I was scrolling through the
Okay.
recommendations here.
So we're not ready.
One other change that I think I would recommend supporting is the state law allows for this exemption for smaller projects down to 4 units. Our code, we decided that we didn't want this for small projects. We only wanted it for projects of at least 10 units. And so I guess the question is, are you open to seeing smaller units receive this type of incentive? And I think the reason to support it is that we're seeing a lot of big apartment projects and we're seeing a lot of single family housing. We're not getting a lot of middle housing. And I think middle housing projects frequently have to be those smaller projects that might be fewer than 10 units, but maybe they're 4 to 6 units in an infill type setting. And so I would, if we keep the program, I would recommend that we look at having the minimum project size reduced to the state minimum of 4 units.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I don't have a problem with that either.
All right. The 20-year MFTE program, I mentioned this at the beginning. Cities, Port Orchard can adopt a 20-year MFTE program where we have to have at least 25% of the units sold to a qualified nonprofit or local government partner. I don't know that we are set up with Housing Kitsap at this time to take advantage of this type of program. I think they're the only agency that could probably partner with us on this. And right now, I just don't think we're ready to go down this road. It's something that we could continue to look at, and I wanted to confirm that the committee agreed we shouldn't pursue this right now.
I'm okay with that.
I am too.
All right. So the other thing that I think we should wait on is the state law has been updated to allow that we grant extensions for 12-year tax exemptions. I don't think that that's something that we ought to do. We only have 2 12-year exemptions on the books at this time. And I think once those expire, we probably shouldn't be looking at extending those. There are some other recommendations in the Housing Action Plan, such as renter protections and other things that we may want to look at. But I think that giving the developer an extra 12 years without especially moving the needle in terms of what sort of reduced rent is actually being charged is probably something that we shouldn't pursue at this time.
I agree.
Strongly agreed.
I'm
All right.
I'm with you guys.
All right. And then finally, this last one is to require relocation assistance for low income tenants whose rent subsidy is expiring. And so this is similar to the previous discussion. And I think that this seems like a more logical first step to me than giving a developer an additional 12-year tax break. But again, I'm not quite sure how we would administer this at this time.
Mhm.
And so I would propose that we not pursue this right now. But it's something that we kind of monitor and potentially look at in the future. I think our first exemption doesn't expire for at least 3 or 4 more years. I think it was issued in 2017. So 2027 is when our first 12-year exemption expires. So we do have time to study this a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think with comprehensive planning and other jurisdiction and housing affordability, and trying to keep people from becoming homeless, I think you'll hear more about this in a broader context. So I say we just kind of sit back and learn from what others are talking about or doing.
All right. And I know there's a lot of people in the audience, and so maybe we can jump to Ian's item and then come back to the second half of this discussion.
All right, let's do that then. I know this other stuff has been absolutely riveting, but we'll go ahead and switch back to item 1. Okay. Wanna
Hello. Yes.
Grab this for notes. Hello, can you guys hear me on the Zoom?
Yes, thank you.
Right, so yeah, I'm just here to kind of provide an update for Perry Avenue, the parking issues we've had there. Last week, we met on site with some folks from the neighborhood, discussed the markings that operations and myself had gone out there and made for future locations of no parking signs and parking restrictions. So we just kind of wanted to come full circle on this and kind of finish where we started. We started this process, I don't know, probably about a year ago, from some input from the public, and brought it to the land use committee, and went over some options. And so we marked out no parking predominantly. It's on the west side, we had no parking. And then there's some kind of intermittent spots that will have no parking on the east side, I believe. But we discussed those in the field, concerns with individuals in the neighborhood there, and kind of come to a resolution of where those no parking signs should be, and how to help out the neighborhood on that. I know there was lots of questions about enforcement, and some other issues that are happening around in the neighborhood there. I know there's conversations on whether we should stripe it or not, to further show where those no parking should be, versus just the parking signs themselves. At this point, speaking with Chris Hammer at the city engineer, we're not going to be striping the roadway along with the no parking signs. But if we continue to have issues there, we'll look at taking the next step of maybe adding some striping if people aren't kind of understanding where they can and cannot park, and having issues with that. And so I'll open it up to any questions that we might have.
Did you get fair unanimity in your final results then?
What was that?
Was it pretty unanimous with the working group that met out on site about where the signage and no parking zone should be?
Yeah, I think we came to a good conclusion. I don't think there was any real questions with where we're putting it. I think there was some, hey, we should add a couple more here so it's a little clearer. And then there was a couple areas of where there was some pretty extreme vegetation that Public Works and myself or operations and myself were concerned about. But after talking to the neighborhood, they're going to be dialing that back, kind of trimming it up so that we're going to be good with people to continue to park there as they are and staying out of the street. So I think that the meeting was pretty effective as far as that. And the question from the individual out here was who to call if people are not following through with the parking signs and following those rules, which in case would be you'd call, I guess in this case it'd be DCD has parking enforcement. So it'd be Department of Community Development.
That's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, right?
8 to 5.
Yeah, okay.
And our code does authorize both code or parking enforcement and police officers to give out tickets. I don't know the policy. You'd have to talk to the police department on what their policy is giving tickets out for parking infractions and off hours. But like I said, that's not going to be something that Public Works is going to be taking on. But again, it'll be a conversation with police and parking enforcement.
But you stated that you're going to need to see a history of the problem continuing before you'll consider striping. So how do we document that history? So I'm fairly confident it will continue.
Oh yeah, I mean, continue to send emails. I think I've received quite a few emails. See Click Fix will document issues. It's our online reporting. So that kind of keeps records of what's been reported as far as whether there's issues, whether it's potholes or infractions like that.
Send emails to you, or there's an online.
See Click Fix is gonna be the best way.
How to use that.
Yeah.
We'll take advantage of that.
Yeah, so that's the best way to document. If they go to me, they'll probably get buried in the email. But if So I think that's probably gonna be the best way to go about it. I know that for parking, I talked to enforcement on this as far as, parking. There's a certain number of violations you can have from parking violations before it goes into the higher level of penalties. And then once you have the higher level penalties, then it goes into, oh, are we looking to tow your vehicle? And so there is that process there. It's outlined in our code. But again, that's not going to be Public Works taking those actions. It's going to be both parking enforcement, code enforcement, or the police. Yes.
What would it take to get the signs changed from just no parking to no parking tow-away zone?
So the city doesn't do no parking towaway zones signage, but it's no parking anytime. And so because we don't tow away until we open up that issue of, hey, you have, I think it's 5 parking tickets and you haven't paid them over 45 days or something like that.
Public safety issue where they're parking so far on the road that a fire or ambulance could not get down the road. They are parking out, they park 4 or 5 feet away from the edge. That's why the white lines would make it obvious.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm not parked on that side of the street, but you're not parked within 4 feet of the curb on the other side of the street.
Yeah, so I can't answer that exactly as far as if we would come out and tow someone, as far as that issue goes. So I think that it'd be a conversation with the police or code enforcement. I don't know.
And quite honestly, the people we're dealing with, they laugh at parking. I mean, they're
They have
squatting right now.
warrants, so they are.
They're squatting, they're criminals.
Yeah, so I think that goes to,
Aren't gonna mean squat to them.
well, it's kind of as most things are at the city, it always kind of escalates. So it's going to be, you have tickets, if they remain unpaid, then it goes into the next step of, hey, you have higher infractions. Once those go unpaid too, then it goes into impoundment and towing. So it kind of is that, I understand we can't fix the problem right away, but this will be the first step in kind of trying to solve that problem that you guys are having.
Would it be a situation where if somebody is parked just beyond normal, like, so if they're in the street versus just parked where they're not supposed to be, but it's not creating a hazard, would that maybe just warrant a 911 non-emergency called in? Or would the parking enforcement then call law enforcement if a car was far enough out on the street that it was more than just parking ticket? I mean, I know that that's not for you to decide, but I'm just asking if we're following a protocol for calling, parking enforcement would be the first round. Would they then contact law enforcement? Or if we see it as a legit danger to us, not just parked incorrectly, would we skip that step and take our own judgment and do what we've been doing and call law enforcement?
I mean, I think you can call who you think might be, as far as deemed necessary. If it isn't police's problem, I'm sure they'll give you the same answer, that they might say, hey, that's not our deal, call someone else. We all kind of, I'm sure you guys have gotten bounced around before.
The next morning or on weekends.
Bay Street is multi-use and Perry is residential.
Perry considered residential?
Who's talking?
Sorry, yeah, so
I
there's.
can't tell who's talking.
Yeah. So the question, that's all, residents along Perry Avenue. And so the question is whether Perry Avenue is residential, or commercial, or what?
Is it residential or multi-use? Perry.
You mean, what is
It's primarily single family residential, but I have a question for the committee. Would it be beneficial if we have Ian come back to the table here and use this microphone? And if the public has comments, they can come to the podium and speak directly into the microphone.
That would be great.
Okay.
All right. Turn the podium around.
Sit there, you can use that microphone.
Oh, thank you.
This way, the people on Zoom can't hear you.
Okay.
So let's get you out here and everybody.
There you go. Hi, I'm Bruce Mabry. I'm with 316. I'm strongly suggesting that fog lines be included in this proposal because just telling them what side of the street to park on is not enough. They stop in the road basically. They're 4 feet from a curb, 4 feet from a retaining wall. If you're familiar with the street, it's a very narrow street. And just putting lines on the road will make it obvious, not a judgment call on anybody's part of where to park, where not to park. And quite honestly, parking tickets are not going to affect these people. These are criminals that are squatting properties right now that we're dealing with, 6 to 12 cars in a single residence that come and go and they rotate out and deals go on in the street and just. Okay, somebody says there are people living in the cars. I haven't seen that, but so come on up and tell him then, that's my statement. Fog lines, you've got to do the lines so that it's specifically defined, no judgment. Thank you.
I'm Dawn and I live at 303 Perry Avenue North. I just propose a question is, could we get the parking signs up so that we can start making our streets safe, expedite that, and then get the lines up? Right now we have basically no recourse. It's escalating. They're leaving nasty letters for us. So now they're being combative with regards to parking. I'm hoping that the signs would mitigate the interaction between us, and then we could get the lines up, because without lines, as was said by Bruce, it's not a question of how far out in the street they are or not, which would allow law enforcement or whoever writing tickets to have more justification. The street varies greatly. It has pinch points. So for somebody using common sense, it would make sense. I mean, these aren't law-abiding citizens that are creating a danger on our street. These are people living in cars, drug dealers and squatters. So this is in my opinion, the first part of a process of making our neighborhood safe again. They have taken it over, which isn't your problem, but we're hoping that this begins to make our street safe again. I mean, there are times where you literally cannot get through. So anyways, I would love to see it expedited. I don't know when the soonest we could get signs up. And then I do believe fog lines are necessary because of the people we're dealing with, not for the community itself as a whole.
You're gonna have to speak up.
Yeah, push it.
There we go.
There we go. All right. So yeah, we talked about kind of doing this as a 2-part process. Again, I think that we're going to start with the kind of least intrusive, least cost as far as overall maintenance. It's our policy to mainly just to use parking signs for parking enforcement and instead of fog lines. Typically, we do not have fog lines in our along our local streets. But again, we're not going to roll them out completely as far as in the future if it continues to be an issue. We just don't know if indeed the signs are not going to be enough. And so with it being an enforcement issue, again, you said, hey, they're not going to listen to tickets. It's hard for me to believe that they're going to listen to fog lines if that's the case. And so I think that we're going to stick with the parking signs unless we're directed differently from the committee here. As far as from the public works standpoint, that's kind of our policy to start with a small amount and kind of continue to increase from there if we continue to see issues. As far as timing goes, we'll be working with one of the operations, Mark Fournier, is who kind of does our sign installation for the city. He's really good. He was the one I met with out there earlier to do the markings of the signs. He does have the equipment list that he's going to need as far as material goes, changing slightly based on our conversations out there in the field. But he's usually relatively quick. I'm not going to give a hard timeline for it, but hopefully we can have this out in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and hopefully sooner. But again, it is a priority for us. I know it seems like it's taken a long time to get to this point. It's just we do want to get this out there for you guys.
Simple question. Sorry. Well,
I'll repeat the question.
the sign, talk about it, click it, fix it thing, declick fix, and both signs you put there right next on the same post as the no parking, so that everybody in the neighborhood knows who to contact to get this documented.
The question is whether or not we can put see-click fix signs to kind of promote, hey, where do you go to report issues? I don't believe we have signs for see-click fix. It's just our system that we use. If you call in or go on our website for the city of Port Orchard, can be directed to the see-click fix program, and then you can go from there. It's just a online submittal program. Yeah, see-click fix.
Can I get clarification on see-click fix? Is see-click fix for parking issues?
Can I jump in? How many are familiar with what see-click fix is? How many people in the audience have it on their smartphones?
Yeah, there's one person.
Okay, it is an app for your smartphone, and you can report using your phone. You can report any issue 24 hours a day, and it is logged into a system where, for example, I can see what anyone else reports. You can also do it anonymously. So it sounds like what I've heard today is that the problem you're talking about is non-residents parking on your streets, not the people who live there.
Well,
And
no, they
in
live
this
there,
case,
but
it
they don't
sounds-
live there legally.
It's
you can report them
the
24/7.
question. Go ahead.
And that's probably the best way to report them and make a record of it.
Yeah, I think it's predominantly not just whether or not they live there or not. It's just illegally parking. So once these signs are not up or not, if they park in an area that they should not be parking in, and I think the biggest concern is on weekends or off hours when there's not active parking enforcement. That is when the concern is that they'll see the biggest issues. And how do they report that when parking enforcement and public works aren't open?
So I just want to be clear that see-click fix is indeed used for reporting on parking.
It has historically, yes.
Okay, I was not
Um,
aware of that. I
I-
thought it was more for potholes and, broken signs and those kinds of things, but okay.
Yeah, and I don't operate the see-click fix. I just know that what I've seen from it, and so maybe it's being improperly used. But I have seen reports of parking issues for that.
So in terms of a time frame, I think you said 4 to 6 weeks, if I heard correctly, before signs go up.
Yeah, that just to make sure, I think that we do have a stock of signs, but I just want to give myself or Public Works a little bit of grace period there on making sure that
Right.
we do have the materials for it, because it can take a while to get materials in this current environment for construction.
Sure. And then what I would recommend that we consider then is the police can go up and issue tickets at any time, right? So I think the fair thing to do would be to issue some warnings and then for them to have a bit of a campaign on this so that people will learn rather quickly that indeed there will be tickets given. And then, Ian, I think that we should be prepared that if that's not working or working well enough, then maybe because of the nature, kind of the pinch points and how crowded it is, maybe fog line does make sense that people can kind of assess how well they park on their own for those that care. And I can certainly understand that if there's not a fog line, then that can be difficult to kind of determine whether you personally did a good job or not when you're getting out of your car. So I do see there is value to a fog line, but I also see that Public Works would like to take sort of an incremental approach to doing this, and maybe combining the signs with a limited campaign by the police to make sure repeat offenders are ticketed. Maybe that's good enough, but maybe it won't be at the same time. And I would think that we would want to be prepared to get out there pretty quickly, certainly before the winter sets in, if we need to stripe or if we need to throw down some paint. Fred.
I'd like to add that it sounds like there should be an active block watch. And if you are an active block watch, you can get block watch signs that warn people that they're in an area where the citizens are watching.
Right. I'm.
They're
Kathy
indicating that they do have them.
Rich, I live at 245 Perry, and we do have active block watch signs. And we have an active phone tree about this bit of a crisis situation. You mentioned residents, the people that are coming and going, whether it be on car, truck, foot, bicycle, motorcycle. They're coming and going, but they're occupying a dwelling illegally. So one of the things we talked about possibly for the future concerned residents permits and limiting hours in which non-residents could park the numbers of hours if this continues to be a very serious problem. The police have been very responsive, but we're taking up their valuable time. They have made multiple responses to our calls by many people in this group and people that are not here. And they've also been doing regular drive-bys, but the people that are occupying the dwelling illegally also have a mechanism to know when the police are coming, so they often disappear. Anyway, that's just, I think if we look at down a timeline going into the future of other potential interventions that might help, it might be useful. Thank you.
So yeah, just to conclude this, oh, we got another individual coming up, sorry.
Hello, my name is Jeff White. I live at 1698 Bay Street. My property is adjacent to Perry where I park. I want to thank you very much for coming out and listening to us. I just wanted to clarify a conversation we had on the street about the 500 block of Perry on the east side about the non-parking signs. Are those still not going to be put down at the 500 block?
Correct, yeah, where all those blackberry bushes were growing over.
Blackberry bushes.
Yeah, we're not gonna put no parking signs there, so you'll be to continue parking that location, of
Great, thank you very much.
course. So is there any other citizens want to talk? Okay. So yeah, to conclude, I think that Scott, you had a great idea of kind of planning for this incremental approach and not just saying, hey, yeah, we do that. It is painting and striping does need to happen during the summer for the most part. And so I think that we will be cognizant of timelines and keeping an eye out for if this issue continues after the signs are put up, and well as, after the striping, we can look at whether or not or revisit residential parking passes and see if potentially that can help, as it has helped in some of the neighborhoods around here. Though I do know, like we talked about, it's slightly a different issue that was being addressed with that. Typically, it was more like shipyard workers that were parking in residential streets. That was really the big issue that's trying to be addressed with that. I won't say just shipyard, other employing parkment in there. I don't want to point the finger just at them. But so I think that we will be cognizant of that timelines that we need to kind of keep in mind as far as striping, and then revisit future actions as needed if it continues to be an issue. So if there's nothing else from the residents here, and if there's nothing else from the committee, I will conclude the discussion on Perry Avenue.
Yeah, the only thing that I think that was worth also covering in the wrap up is maybe a coordinated campaign by the police to give
Right.
warnings and then tickets.
Yeah, that would be, the question is who would coordinate that effort? And in that case, yeah, it'll be a coordination between Public Works, parking enforcement and the police.
Is 911 element of non-emergency an appropriate call to make for parking stuff or? Okay, but I was not for it's not for open.
The question was who to call.
Yeah.
the answer-
I can say the police do not have a non-emergency number, so you have to call 911 if you want to talk.
Yeah, you have to call 911, but yeah, call 911 and then just mention to them, this is not an emergency. Yeah, they'll put you on hold and then get to you when they can.
You can also send a email to the police chief.
All right. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you, everybody. Nick, did you want to jump back to multifamily tax exemption program and the second half of that discussion?
Yeah, so the second half of that discussion, we have, as we're looking to amend the ordinance potentially, we have a request from a property owner for the Diaz Meadows project, and this is on Old Clifton Road. I'm clicking on the parcel number or the parcels here. There's 4 properties along Old Clifton Road, just past the entrance to the industrial park. They have a 96 unit apartment complex project. It's constrained by critical areas, but they've designed, I think, something that will work pretty well. Their project also requires that they build the 390 to 580 zone intertie, a portion of it anyway. And unfortunately for them, the cost of that project is about $1 million, and the maximum credit they can get against their water connection charges is about $180,000. And so the developer came back and said, look, this doesn't work for us because we can't get enough water CFC credit. What other incentives exist? And so he started asking about the multifamily tax exemption options and said, would the city council consider this as part of, I said, hey, we're not going to consider this as a one-off, but because we're opening this issue anyway, I will bring it up with the committee and see what people think. My thought on the project is, the city is getting a pretty valuable addition to the city's water infrastructure. And so, if this developer were willing to provide some affordable units, maybe this is something that we would want to include in our amended map. They are putting in sidewalks, which can connect down to the industrial park. And so there is the ability to get transit service here. It's close to the freeway, so it's probably a pretty good opportunity for some affordable housing, and wanted to get the take of the land use committee to see whether this is an option for him.
All
You can
right.
see all the buildings are oriented along Old Clifton with the parking kind of behind the structure, and there's a bit of topography. So this is like a terraced parking area, and they've got to build some retaining walls. I mean, it's definitely not the easiest site to develop to begin with. And that combined with the fact that they have to do this major water project makes it all the more expensive to build.
And were they asking for a 12-year or?
They'd like an 8-year, but our 8-year program right now, they wouldn't qualify for either of our 8-year options. And under what we're talking about with 50 units per acre, I haven't done the math, but I don't think they would qualify on a density basis under the new program either. So I think the only way that they would potentially qualify is under a 12-year, unless, as I mentioned, unless we wanted to rethink how we use our 8-year program, really to focus on just providing additional housing units so that we're, helping with affordable, improving affordability of rental units in Port Orchard.
So this would be a project that's not on any of the existing maps in terms
What do
of
you mean?
proximity.
Oh. It's not even a proximity to transit issue. It's currently outside of our center boundary, and we have in our code, we've, state law on the MFTE program says that it has to be within an urban center, but doesn't define an urban center except to say that it has basic services and is close to things like parks and public facilities and has pedestrian and capabilities. This probably is within our transit proximity, but it's not within one of our designated centers. And so that was another change that I was going to suggest as part of the MFTE program, is to say, let's revert to the state's definition of an urban center rather than adding our own layer to further complicate this. So that would be, so if we were going to tell Mr. Diaz, yes, we're potentially interested in adding this area to the map, we would need to change the ordinance to say that, to refer to the definition of urban centers under state law, and then amend the map, either the type 1 or type 2 or type 3 map, to include him. Type 1 is the 12-year affordable housing project, or affordable housing exemption. And so the direction that we were going on the 12-year exemption was potentially saying that 20% of units have to be affordable at 20% below the fair market rent to a person qualifying based on their income. So right now it's at 10% below fair market rent. So we were talking about basically doubling the affordability requirement. So this may be a way to get, 20, I guess it would be what's 20% of 96, 19 units. So we'd get 19 affordable housing units that would be renting below fair market rent. If it was a 12-year exemption, and the developer would be getting, some relief that helps pay for some of the cost of improving the site.
All right.
It seems like it's stretching what I thought was the intent of multifamily, the exemption, to expand it to almost any project as just a discount because they're having problems making it pencil out. So I wouldn't support this.
But aren't they, at the same time, aren't they accommodating if we choose the 12-year, aren't they accommodating the 12-year tax exemption program in its entirety?
If that's the direction you wanted to go, yes. And I will say they immediately abut a center. So they're adjacent to the industrial park center, which is our countywide employment center. So it's not like they aren't close to a center, they're just on the boundary.
Sure.
So I'm a little confused. It sounds like we're trying to carve out an exception, so I agree with Fred on that one. I think it goes to the whole discussion about whether we even want to be in, have this program to begin with. I do get concerned when we're getting, we've seen more than one project that hasn't penciled out when we try to be helpful. And I think it's a slippery slope. So I'm not supportive at this time until we have the discussion, the whole discussion on the tax exemption with the council.
Okay, I'm right now, I'm only, I told Mr. Diaz, the applicant for this project, that I would inquire with the land use committee to see if there's interest in whether it's something that he should continue pursuing. So it sounds like this needs to go to a full council discussion probably in September, because we don't have another work study meeting before then. And if this was going to happen, it would be it's going to be several months before there would be any movement on it.
Yeah, Scott, what's your take on this?
I'm torn on it. I do see the value of the development going in and helping with water infrastructure, but at the same time, and I'm guessing a lot of it has to do with the topography and the shape of the land, it doesn't pencil out. So what's the density that they're accommodating here?
I don't recall the total acreage, but I've got the parcel viewer up. I can give you a rough estimate here real quickly. Looks like the first.
And so
Sorry,
I'm
go
kind
ahead.
of torn on it. I do see that there is some still some value in the 12-year program. At the same time, with rents coming down, I don't know that we want to float this as we have in the past to development.
It looks like it's a little over 5 acres. There's 4 parcel numbers, but you know, in calculating density, you have to look at taking away the critical areas. And so, you know, if 30% of the site is critical acres, and it's probably a net 3.5 acre site, which at 96 units is in the 30 unit per acre range. Josie, you got your hand up?
24.
Oh, it's just that we had done a rough gross calculation, which was at 13.5 or so. But yeah, you'd have to take out critical areas, and without knowing what that is, your number's probably about right, Nick.
Yeah. 96 units. Okay.
So I can tell Mr. Diaz that the committee is recommending that the full council discuss the issue, and they, you know, aren't crazy about the idea, but it's, you know, it needs to be a more holistic discussion with the full council, and it's going to take some time.
Yes.
All right, that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
And then if that's it, then I got just a couple things to mention. Jay and Fred, if you guys have anything that you ever want to add to the agenda, you just need to let Nick know. It doesn't have to go through me. I don't want to be a gatekeeper for that. So if you have anything that you want to add to an agenda, just let Nick know, and we're happy to talk about it. One thing that I'd like to add to the next agenda is the signage that's propagating in our rights of ways. And I talked to Rob about this a little bit last week, and you know, he was of the opinion that, with the exception of political signs, that maybe we ought to go ahead and do a sweep, and then if somebody wants to challenge it, we'll look at the challenge they give to us. But I'm seeing in pretty intense propagation of signs, and it just doesn't look good. It looks kind of blighty in some areas, and in other areas, signs are being knocked over. And I've seen one whole corner just cleared of signs, and they were all piled on top of each other. So I think if we were to go in and maybe take a look at clearing of the signs that are not political, that might send a good message to people. And I know that, Nick, you've said that we have to be careful about this, and that the Planning Commission is looking at this. But at the same time, I'm looking for some action fairly soon.
The code allows these signs now. We couldn't go and take them because they're allowed. So we have to amend the code to prohibit commercial signs in the right of way in order to be able to do that sweep. And we are presenting information to the Planning Commission on the 1st of August. So in 2 weeks, it goes to the Planning Commission. And then based on that discussion, we're likely to bring an ordinance forward at the September meeting.
Okay, and so there's obviously no grandfathering of signs. And do we have any current stipulations on how signs are mounted? Like, can they use those wire brackets?
The language is that it's like 2 by 4 feet, and it has to be pushed into the ground. And I think it can be a stake, or it can be the wire prongs that go into the ground.
Okay.
So the only ones we could pull right now is if they're too big relative to what's allowed, or if they're, you know, somehow permanently installed that isn't something that's just pushed into the dirt.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I don't know how the others feel, but I would like us to do something because it's gotten kind of crazy.
No, I've gotten plenty of comments from residents on the west of 16 about it at both ends of McCormick Woods, and you know, full backing on that. We're also seeing a propagation of more of the flag signs again, that we've, you know, that there is prohibition against. I would just caution that we need to follow our own ordinances, and I'm glad that it's going to the planning committee. So thank you on that, Nick, and whoever else is championing that.
Yes, and just so you know, we received legal advice, and what we were directed to do was we need to document the problem over a period of time, and so that's what we've been doing, is looking at how the problem has changed through the winter and into the spring and summer. And right now we have so many signs out, and it seems to be a seasonal thing. When the weather is good and we have lots of daylight, people are putting a lot of signs out. In the winter, they tend to disappear. But we now have enough information, I think, to report to the Planning Commission with a recommendation, and they can then take action.
But
Okay.
I hate to use the word also of pollution, but people don't pick up their signs either. So anything that we could help with that, I'm all in favor of.
Fred?
I agree. I'm just wondering, what does, for example, Gig Harbor do, or what does Paulsbo do? And I agree that the wire stands are dangerous because they're very breakable, and they then become a hazard if they're driven over or stepped on. There's actually one across from City Hall that just fell off its wire stand. And these are things that you don't even want to touch, because you never know if someone's going to have a picture of you touching a sign. So it's kind of a difficult issue. It's like there's trash, but if someone takes out of context, it looks like you're removing something when it was already on the ground. And it would be nice if there were timelines of, after a certain election, can you enforce like 60 days afterwards, they should be removed.
That isn't
can't, but-
Well, it's not for, we're a content neutral code, so we don't look at the content of a sign. And so if it's an election sign, we're not supposed to look at it as an election sign. If other cities are taking actions that result in there being fewer signs, it's because they're taking more risk. And I think either that, or they haven't amended their code to respond to the Gilbert Supreme Court decision from 2014. So in 2014, this case came down that said signs had to be content neutral. You can't look at the content of a sign to make a decision. Since then, the Ninth Circuit Court has issued a decision that says there is some content when you're looking at commercial versus non-commercial. So they've opened the door for cities to take action. And the advice that we had was that we need to be cautious if we're going to go down that road, and we need to really document everything that we're doing and why we're doing it, and make the case for doing it so that it can be defended. And if other cities they've either taken similar measures, or they're still living in a pre-Gilbert world where they have not updated their sign code to be content neutral.
Okay, so back up for the political. I thought we had in our code that they had to be taken down so many, they could only be put up so many weeks or days before a political election had to be taken down so many days. Or am I thinking of the county law?
That was the old code, and maybe it's the county law, but the county pamphlet that gets printed for candidates may say something like that, but we may have put it in there because it's the right thing to do, not because it's required.
Right. I don't know that the county's pamphlet discusses that.
I can't remember. They run it by me every year and say, is everything still current? And we haven't changed our sign code in a couple of years, so I haven't had them update anything, but that could be the source of that information.
All right. Well, I look forward to some action on that. It has gotten kind of out of control.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Anything else? Go to the order. All
Good.
right.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye, everybody.